And I don't believe it's going to cause you too much concern, and I'll give you a good sense of what kind of questions are going to be on the exam. Okay, before I start, any questions, anything you want me to address? No? All right, well, then let's jump in, and we can always deal with them as they come. Right, so last time, just check my question slides, which apparently I don't have any anywhere. Okay. All right, so we go back. Okay. Wow, I had to go back a ways. Okay, so last time we were talking about, we ended off talking about rational choice theories. And this is basically Rodney Stark, his sort of semi-revolutionary take in terms of sociology of religion on how religions work, right? And Stark, again, is well known, I think, and should be understood as coming into the kind of discussion of sociology of religion, a discourse that's very unified, right? Everybody basically agrees on most things, and Stark comes in, and along with him and the people who follow him, really starts to kind of upend a lot of the discourses. And one of the things, like I said last time, that he suggests is that basically religion comes down to a rational choice for those who choose to be religious. My pen has apparently died. Okay. Yeah, so basically it comes down to a rational choice for those who want to be religious. Oh, it's not that. My computer is frozen. Interesting. Oh. No, it's going to jump all over the place in about half a second. Okay, maybe not. It's not being as responsive as I'd like it to be, but let's try this again. Okay, that works. All right, so yes. Basically, the actors who choose religion are rational actors according to Stark, right? So he is not in the camp that thinks that it's sort of an irrational thing that modernity and science are going to wipe away. Okay, so we set this up last time, right, where he basically was suggesting that religion, that, you know, what people want out of life is rewards, right? That you want stuff in life. You want to be happy, you want to be fed, you want there to be, you know, no death, no mourning, no weeping, and all of that fun stuff. But a lot of things are just not that available, right? That, you know, ample food, at least in the past, was maybe not available. Power, safety, you know, freedom from tyranny, all of those things were potentially not things that were available in great numbers. And so rewards in life for Stark tend to be relatively scarce. Rewards are generally pretty scarce, and it's scarce if there's not enough of it to go around. Now, the scarcest rewards of all for Stark are things that aren't available at all, but people want anyway. So here it might be something like eternal life, right? You want eternal life, you want to live forever, you want to know that you're not going to die, you want to know that you're going to the good place, not the bad place, and certainly not to the void where you simply cease to exist. So those are very, very scarce, right? Because they basically aren't available at all in the here and now. So the scarcest rewards tend to be among the most valued, right? So basically the thing that you can't get tends to be the thing that you really want, the thing that you're really concerned about getting. What religion, though, offers is not rewards, right? So rewards are things that are available in the here and now, right? That should be available in this world, things that you want. Religion doesn't offer necessarily the reward, it offers a compensator, right? So religious compensators are kind of similar to the reward, but it's a sort of substitute, right? So think of, you know, let's just in kind of pretend terms, imagine a religion where, you don't have enough food to eat in the here and now, but there'll be an endless feast in the afterlife, right? If you follow the prescriptions of that particular religion, right? You might not be happy, right, or satisfied now, but if you follow the path, you can reach something better, which would be enlightenment, right? So if you meditate and deny yourself things, you could reach a sort of enlightenment that would substitute for contentment or happiness, right? So it offers a compensator, right? A sort of substitute for the desired reward, right? And you can't actually live forever in the real world, right? But you could be offered a sort of eternal life in the land to come, or in the world to come, or however a religion wants to phrase that, or a rebirth into a better form, right? Of whatever it happens to be. So Stark says these compensators, at least for the people who believe in them, right, they actually can be obtained, but religions propose methods for achieving those compensators that are generally rather elaborate and lengthy, right? If you're going to escape the cycle of suffering, right, in Buddhism, you're going to have to live your life in a way that detaches you in the long term from material possessions, right? You're going to have to say, I'm going to deny myself material possessions, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to detach from worldly things to escape the cycle of desire, which leads to suffering, right? So it's a long and relatively elaborate method. If you're going to, in the Christian sense, get to heaven, right, you're going to have to, through your life, try to purge yourself of sin, right? You're going to have, or, if you're Catholic, you're going to have to partake in the sacraments, or you're going to have to go to church, partake in the sacraments over and over again through your entire life, right? It's going to be this ongoing process that only really ends when you die. So, as I say, the process is often rather elaborate and rather lengthy, with the promise that you're going to get it at some point, right? Maybe here. So, yeah, it might be in the distant future, in another reality, right? So in heaven or in the afterlife or after you're reborn or whatever. Now, what Stark will say is if the reward is available, people tend to prefer the reward to the compensator, right? Which is why, you can read rational choice theory as suggesting that when you get to a state of, say, material abundance, like we have in Canada today, right? You can get almost anything. You flip open your phone, or I guess you don't flip open your phone. You open your phone and you can order food to your house or anything you really want. That religion's going to have to work a lot harder because, the compensators of, well, you'll have a full belly at the heavenly banquet is not going to work as well when you have a full belly now, because people are going to be like, yeah, I'm good. I'll just eat a lot of food now rather than, living an ascetic life. And so those compensators are going to have to be less tangible for religion to thrive when you have a lot of material abundance. Okay, so people, and the one thing that people desire, not everybody, but most people desire, is some kind of sense of permanence, right? Some kind of desire for eternal life. But since that's not available, you have to sort of, it can't be achieved. You're not going to live forever, right? So you have achieving the compensator generally has to come through religion, and it's going to involve that lengthy process. So, and that one is not going away. No matter how much material abundance there is, unless we figure out a way to upload our consciousness to the internet, and then it'll probably be controlled by Elon Musk somehow, I think, that one's not going away anytime soon. Okay, so, compensators. They have certain advantages and disadvantages. So, big advantage, they offer a huge reward that's not plausibly available from other sources, right? Eternal life, endless feasts, no more suffering, New Jerusalem, all that fun stuff. So eternal life, reunion with the departed, a perfected soul, unending bliss, whatever it happens to be, right? These are things that people do deeply desire. However, one of the disadvantages of a lot of religious compensators is you can't know for sure whether you're going to receive it or what form you will receive it in. So especially if you think of something like eternal life, again, let's quote some Hamlet. Death is the undiscovered country, that shore from whom no traveler returns, right? And so inherently, the promise of eternal life is kind of risky because it's like, okay, so I lived a good life, right? I went to church every Sunday. I took the sacraments. I didn't cheat on my wife. I didn't steal from the poor. I could have screwed that guy in the big business deal of 24 where I could have made all of this money, but I did things honestly. And all I'm kind of promised is, maybe you'll go to heaven. We think so, probably. We're not entirely sure. No one's ever been back from the other side to verify. And certainly, there's not a guest list that you can check to see if, your dearly departed loved one was on the guest list to the good place. So, religious compensators are riskier than rewards, right? Because you can get if you have access to the reward, you can get it right now. But the compensator, is sort of promised in a sense where it's going to be hard to know whether you got it or not. Okay, so that said, I'm doing for time. Okay. According to rational choice theory, though, people choose their actions rationally. And I'm going to highlight that because it's important to this theory, right? It's a rational choice theory. People choose their action rationally based on, so what Stark will say is they do not have to have perfect information. You don't have to have 100% pure certainty to make a rational choice. Basically, people who are saying, I'm going to follow the precepts of Islam, right? They just have to feel like they have enough information, right, to make those decisions. And because people are so wildly different in their psychology, in how they think, people are going to differ greatly in their relative evaluation of the rewards and benefits and of the value of compensators, right? And the likelihood of compensators. So people have to weigh the cost of the compensator against, the perceived value of rewards that might be available now. And so, right, you might have two people that just evaluate this very differently. You might have, a Neil deGrasse Tyson who doesn't think the religious compensators or the promise of them or the basis of their rationality is good enough. And I don't know, let's think of a religious figure. Yeah, I don't know, who knows? Let's say Pope Francis, who's going to evaluate those things very differently, right? Regardless of whether they're both intelligent or knowledgeable or whatever, people are going to vary to a huge extent on how they evaluate these things and on what basis they make what they consider a rational choice. All right, does this all make sense? Yeah? Okay, good. Perfect. Okay. So, I go back to my highlighter. No, my pen, I mean. Generally speaking, when it comes to religions, the perceived value of religious compensators is established through social ties, right? Through social interaction and social bonds. So how does this work, right? Basically, people will perceive the value of a religious compensator as less risky and hence, more likely and more valuable when it's promoted, produced, or consumed collectively, right? So the groups that you belong to and the people within those groups are the ones in a lot of cases that make the case to you as an individual as to whether religious compensators are worth it, right? So if your community is all kind of, behind, specific religious compensators, you're more likely to accept it because your whole community is there, right? And so like big agents here, like if we were thinking, where do people get a lot of their religious beliefs, right? It would be from family. Oops. Wish I would stop doing that. Mentors right? People that they care about and have strong social bonds with, and of course, peers, right? So all of these things, right, when you're presented with the proposition of a religious compensator by people that you trust, by your community members, by your family, by valued mentors, and by peers, you're more likely to evaluate those things as being worth it, right? So a lot of it is social ties. Okay, so religion's compensators are seen as less risky and more valuable when there's credible evidence to you as an individual, right? Whether everybody accepts this evidence or not is not necessarily, but to you, when you're evaluating as an individual, the value of the compensators versus the rewards, when there's credible evidence that participation in religion produces tangible benefits that are not readily explainable in secular terms. So, people in your religious community seem happier, right? Or, more, there's more bliss. That's an S. Whatever it happens to be, right? If you see that there's tangible benefits, right? The people that are living out the process that you would need to attain a specific compensator, if you see the benefits and you can't readily explain them necessarily through secular means, right? Like, your friends who aren't religious are good people, but your friends who are religious are also good people, but the religious ones, seem to have more good stuff. You're going to be like, oh, that must be the religion, right? So you're going to attribute that, the happiness, the bliss, the good life lived, right? The benefits, right? The blessings that these people received in religious terms. Okay. So another way, testimonials are a central way of establishing faith in compensators. So other people telling you, this is what I did and this is how it worked out for me, right? And I mean, if you have ever been around, say, evangelical Christians, testimonials play a huge role in evangelical Christianity, right? And there's in the evangelical lexicon, giving your testimony is seen as very important. And that's saying like what God has done in your life, right? And then the purpose of that is exactly this, right? You're trying to establish to other people who might be considering, joining this faith or remaining within it, that what you're saying, right? That what you're living is the right way and there's benefits to it, and that they can get those benefits as well. And so, when the Mormon missionaries show up at your door and they're door knocking, there's an aspect of this in there as well, where they're going to be like, hey, this is what you can get out of being, a part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? There's a testimony, even though it's Elder Bird and he looks like he's 4, never get over that as long as I live. He's going to tell you what a huge difference, being a Latter-day Saint has made in his life. So testimonials are important, right, for establishing that. We'll get to that in a minute. We'll get to that later. But personal connections, I will say, are much more effective in transmitting faith. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the rise of Christianity. Way more effective than, say, door knocking. Building a friendship with someone, much better path. And we'll talk about how that works for the Mormons. Okay. They're especially persuasive when they come from a trusted source, and especially when it seems like that person has little to gain, right? So you're more likely to trust your friend, a person, say a religious leader that that doesn't have a Mercedes or a boat or an airplane, than the one who looks like all of this is just sort of a financial proposition for them. You're more likely to trust the one who seems like they have little to gain from you joining that particular religion, right? So low levels of material reward tend to come with greater credibility, right? So yeah, like I said, if you're Joel Osteen, or what's the demon-looking guy, Kenneth Copeland, right? Yeah, he looks like he looks demonically possessed. He's not a handsome man, and he just looks weird. But you're like, I really need you to send me money because God told me I need a Learjet. You're less likely to be like, yeah, I think that guy's a reliable source, because obviously he's benefiting in that case, right? Or Paula White, or any number of other religious hucksters that have been common through history, right? Those that are going to benefit materially, you're less likely to trust because you see them as benefiting from it. And then you're like, oh, this is just them searching for a reward. And so you're less likely to view the compensators they offer as generally trustworthy. Okay, does that all, how are we doing with this? Good? Okay. All right, so religious economies. All right, so religious economies is another concept from Stark. How to put this? So as Stark continues his career, right, he starts with rational choice theories, and he starts to build out to other sets of theories. And he ends up hanging out a lot with economists, right? And one is Lawrence Iannacone. And then the other one is Fink. I can't remember Fink's first name off the top of my head for some reason. Anyway, Iannacone, who's an economist, right? And basically, Stark wants to figure out one thing, and one thing only. And we'll talk about this when we talk about secularization too. Why is the US religious, but Europe isn't? Oops, doing that. And this is the big question that Stark wants to answer. And so he pairs up with Iannacone, and they come up with what ends up being called the theories of religious economies. Religious economies, or market theory of religion, is really, really straightforward and simple, right? So, what is a religious economy? It is all the religious activity going on in a society. So basically, Stark and Iannacone say that much like, there's an economy, there's a religious economy. And the religious economy is made up of two camps. There are the religious service providers, right? Churches and other religious organizations that want to offer religious products, and consumers who are interested in various levels in consuming religious products. So basically, it's like a market, right? There is supply and there is demand. And it's trying to figure out how you can understand religion and how religion works based on different market models and different kind of sets of supply and demand. Okay, so one of the really big things that Stark and Iannacone do with religious economies, and again, it's not a perfect theory. There's some people that really object to it, and we could talk about that. But instead of what everyone had done prior to Stark is think about religion in terms of the demand, right? In terms of what do people want out of religion, and how do they get it? And in what cases do they leave religion because they're not getting what they want, right? And a lot of secularization theories are based on the sort of demand side, assuming that all of the energy in religion comes from the individual and what they are wanting in terms of religion. What Stark and Iannacone say is when it comes to market theories of religion, you also have to think about the supply side, right? And the supply side is the religious organizations, and think, okay, under what conditions are they able to create demand for religious products, right? So is there certain conditions where the activities of religious organizations will actually increase the demand, right? Increase people's interest in religion. Okay, so you can basically talk about two basic setups in religious economies. You can either have a relatively free and open market where religions compete relatively freely and try to convince people, to essentially become interested, become members, and purchase whatever religious product they're offering. Or you can have a religious monopoly, which is usually where the state picks one religion or a couple of religions and makes those the official religions. Now, what Stark says is religious free economies or unregulated economies will tend to be very pluralistic. You're going to have a lot of small religious groups competing for religious believers, right? So there's going to be a lot of product offerings, kind of like a free economic market, right? If you have an unregulated market, people are going to come up with all sorts of products, different kinds of phones, different kinds of shoes, and compete for people's attention and people's money. In the same way, in a free religious economy, you're going to get, I'm going to split off and start, a small church out of a strip mall and offer something crazy or wild or fun, and try to attract people to that. Or, you're going to have a very traditional service and try to attract people to that particular form of religion. So in a free market, you actually get a lot of pluralism. In a monopoly, you get very little, right? You get very little. And what Stark says, a couple of things. Monopolies tend to make for very lethargic religions, right? If you have, say, let's think of an example, Sweden. In Sweden, the Lutheran Church, still kind of to this day, is the official state church of Sweden. But for centuries, it was sort of the mandated church of Sweden, right? Or in England, right, Anglicanism, the Church of England was the state religion. In France, it would have been Catholicism, right? And what Stark will say is that this made religious groups very lazy, right? Because, say, in Sweden, the government, the state, right, the king, paid for all of the religious authorities, right? So you were a priest in the Church of Sweden, the Lutheran Church in Sweden, and your salary was coming from the state. So you really didn't have to get off your butt and convince people that they should be coming to church and giving you donations because the building was being maintained by the state, your salary was being maintained by the state, so you were kind of a lazy cleric. Same thing in France, relatively unenthusiastic Catholic Church, according to Stark, and most of Europe, through until at least the Reformation, but even afterwards, the churches were relatively lethargic. They tended to appeal to the upper classes, but not so much, going out into the countryside and recruiting people. And we'll see a deeper form of this in Stark's argument later on. But that's basically, right, state monopolies tend to be really lethargic. Free markets tend to be very energetic because you have to compete. No one's giving you money. There's no official state church, right? So if you're going to survive as a religious group, you're going to have to find people to fund you, to come attend and support you. And so Stark, always thinks of this as the US versus Europe. Europe has tended historically to be dominated by religious monopolies. And so when looking at Europe, Stark is like, Europe is very irreligious because it's been dominated by lazy state churches. And they never really went out and appealed to people that deeply. The US, on the other hand, from its founding in the 1770s, had this principle of religious freedom that there wouldn't be an official state church. So, without an official state church, lots of churches emerged offering lots of forms of religion, which basically led to a very energetic religious field, which means that the US, despite being very modern, obviously, has always been considerably more religious than Europe. We'll look at this argument in depth when we talk, I think, in the last third of the course, if I recall correctly, about Stark's argument in a book, Stark and Fink, this argument, Roger Fink, I thought of it. Stark and Roger Fink's argument in a book called The Churching of America, which is a whole religious economies sort of examination of why the heck the US remains as religious as it is, even though it's a deeply modern country. Okay. Oh, I think I said a lot of this. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Well, look at this quote. This is a quote from The Rise of Christianity. I think it's an interest, this is for the glory of God. An interesting quote from Rodney Stark. Okay, we'll talk about this claim later on. Right, so monopolies, lethargic religions, a history of state support for religion in Europe means there's been a decline in that market. The US has never had a state religion. It's more vital, more varied, and the US and other free religious markets mean that it's much more likely that you're going to get, say, new religious movements emerging, right? So Stark thinks it's no surprise that, say, Mormonism emerged from the United States, and other new religious movements like the Jehovah's Witnesses have emerged from places like the US rather than from Europe. Oh, I should make one other point on this last slide because it's an important one. This last point. Pluralism makes it really hard for new religious firms to gain market share because you have a saturated market. So the new religious firms, right, that make it tend to be ones that are really, really good. They're really, really strong and really, really capable, and they've got a really good market pitch to people around them, or they wouldn't survive because there's already lots of religious products available. And again, the Mormons here are a really good example of this. Okay, so market theorists and rational choice theorists tend to believe that religious pluralism fosters religious vitality, right? The more vitality you have, the more religion is going to survive into modernity, right? Lethargic religions in contact with modernity are going to do less well because people were already less committed to them and they're offering less appealing products. Yeah, I mean, and here the idea again is people are going to be induced into participating in religion when they find a religion that satisfies their particular desires, right? And here I think Stark is making a really interesting and really important move. And what he's suggesting, and I always, I always say this to my very Catholic friends, and it pisses them off. They really don't like it. Because, they're like, if everybody just has to be Catholic. And I'm like, yeah, but not everybody is interested in the brand of religion that Catholicism offers. Maybe if within Catholicism you had more brands, it would be more appealing. And they're like, shut up. No one likes you. I'm like, I know. I'm a know-it-all. Okay. But the more, like, you as an individual, me as an individual, right, we all want different things. Let's say, what is that one? It's in the former car dealership. I think it's called Celebration Church, right? It's like on Argyle Road. And honestly, it's in a former car dealership. And from what I've heard, I've never been, but I've seen videos. Going to that church is like going to a rock concert, right? It's like crazy music, smoke machines, crazy lighting, right? All sorts of crazy stuff. There are consumers, that really like that, right? Religious consumers that are like, that's the experience of religion that I want. Now, you also have, say, and here, so on that side, everybody's going to be like, all churches have to be like us. They all have to be energetic and have smoke machines and laser shows, and then everyone will want religion. On the other side of the spectrum, right, I know people who are like traditional Latin Mass Catholics, and what they want is a religious service in a mysterious dead language that no one, including them, understands. Lots of, what do they call it? Bells and smells. That's the one. Because, they have the incense and they have bells and it's, that really appeals to them. And so what Stark is saying is, look, you as an individual might love the smells and bells, right? You might be like, I want mysterious dead language that I don't understand. And I'm going to chant in, a language that hasn't been spoken aloud by normal people in 600 years. Someone else is going to be like, actually, what I want is basically a Taylor Swift concert with, mildly religious overtones. And so, basically, if you have all of those things available in a market, more people are going to find a product that works for them, right? So more people are then going to remain religious. If, however, all you have is the smells and bells, or all you have is the rock concert, some people are going to be like, I'm really not that into Latin, so I'm just going to stay home, or I'm going to, get brunch instead. And if it's just the rock concert, there's going to be some people who are like, man, this is loud. I really fucking hate this. So I'm just going to stay home. And then you get people drifting away from religion because there isn't a product that they want. Stark uses a sort of metaphor of a town where that has never had a restaurant, and a restaurant is introduced, right? So a single fast food chain or a single restaurant. So let's just say, northern Alberta town reaches that point where, Tim Hortons or Boston Pizza decides that it's now worth setting up in that town. And it's usually for those towns, it's a big deal, right? And let's say it's a Boston Pizza opens. You're going to generate some economic activity in that restaurant for people who like the product offering at Boston Pizza. However, everybody who's like, the Boston Pizza thing, not really so much my shtick, they might go occasionally, but they're not going to be deep consumers. Now, if you open 25 restaurants, right? So now you have a Thai place, a Vietnamese place, a Chinese restaurant, a Mexican restaurant, 3 burger joints, a donair place. Basically what you're going to get is more people finding a product within that scenario that they like, right? So it's like, I don't really like Boston Pizza, but I sure like Mexican food, so I'm going to go to a restaurant. You're going to get more consumption in an environment with more things than in a monopoly where, there's only one choice. And religion is essentially the same, right? More choices equals more people participating because they find something that they like. All right, Europe traditionally has been the single fast food chain. America is, everything you can imagine, including lining up at Chipotle for like an hour because you think it's great. It may be. I'm not going to Chipotle until the lineup is 2 people long and I can get in and out in 5 minutes. And same thing with Chick-fil-A. I was at the mall. There was like a 100-person line for Chick-fil-A. And I'm like, I've had Chick-fil-A in the US. It's good, but I'm not standing in a line for an hour to get it. So anyway, I don't know why that was. I'm just ranting about people going to stupid fast food chains and standing in line. Okay. So what Stark and Fink say in Churching of America is a decline in religion should be relatively unlikely as long as a religious marketplace is unregulated, because eventually it's going to produce religious products that are appealing to people. Okay. I got 10 minutes. Okay, we can do a few more here. I've got 6 slides left? Okay, we will probably, okay, 8, 7, okay, we're gonna go fast. We'll probably have to finish up a few of these on Monday before we do review, but that's okay. Okay, so Luckman. Thomas Luckman is another kind of mid to late 20th century sociologist theorizing religion. Collaborated with Berger on social construction of reality, and he became interested in what he called invisible religion. Okay, so he was embedded in this sociological school called subjectivism, which focused on, basically epistemology, how people know what they know, like how they come to know things and why people see things in such different ways. Now, what he said is in modernity, religion's not going away, he thought, but its function in people's lives ultimately had changed, right? So, like Berger, he thought people, made their life meaningful through various meaning systems and worldviews, what are called symbolic universes, which we talked about when we talked about Berger. He suggested kind of that everybody is religious, right? People's symbolic universes can all be thought of as religious because they transcend their subjective consciousness, right? Which is a little bit of a weird abstract statement, but basically because you conceive of a world beyond yourself and that has meaning beyond you, everybody, he thought, was kind of religious in some sense. But basically, he thought that functionally religion was tended to be becoming more non-specific in all society and socialized individuals, right? That basically most people weren't like Christian or Muslim or Jewish, right? Everybody sort of had their own individualized religion in modernity because everybody was sort of constructing their old worldview based on their subjective kind of perception of the world, right? He's a subjectivist. Okay, so now that said, obviously he thought some religions are a little bit more developed than others, right? You would have people adopting, say, Christianity. Christianity, I was going to write Zionity to be quick about it. Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, right? These are more developed forms of religion because they've been around for a long time. And they have things like, historical institutions, institutional specialization, right? Like they have priests or pastors or imams or rabbis or whatever, and clear doctrines and social organizations. And so, they offer kind of on a big level, broad symbolic universes to societies that people can pick and kind of staple onto their subjective consciousness. Be like, okay, I'm going to adopt that worldview of Islam or Christianity or whatever religion it is that I happen to be interested in. Now, that said, what he thought was that increasingly these forms were being superseded by individualized forms of religion. Do I have a last Luckman slide? Yes. Okay. Okay. So yeah, in the past, right, religion was a key structuring institution, right? It was at the center of society. Especially if you think of medieval Europe, right, which is the reference point for a lot of these thinkers, the church sat at the center of society, and a lot of other institutions kind of orbited around the church, right? Schools, universities, the medical system as it was, right? Whatever it happened to be, orbited around the church. Now, for Luckman, once you get to modernity, you get more competing institutions, especially, after the Treaty of Westphalia and the establishment of nation states as we think of them, or certainly after the American and French revolutions, where you get a major growth of nationalism, right? You get more competing institutions, particularly at the level of the state. And now a lot of those institutions are more present than they were in the past, and often are more present to people than religious institutions are, right? Because they've moved to the center of our lives, right? We go to public schools typically. Hospital systems tend to be, within the kind of public sphere, especially in Europe and Canada, a little less so in the US. And yeah, official religion is more about dealing with your private concerns, right? So it becomes, much more personalized and less omnipresent in society. Yeah, and then religion now has to compete, according to Luckman, with a lot of other discourses, right? A lot of other competing kind of self-realization, autonomy, and personal development discourses that have become central to people's lives. And Philip Rieff, who was a psychologist, I think he wrote a book in 1968 called The Triumph of the Therapeutic, right? Where he basically said that, psychology and therapy and making yourself feel better and self-actualize have taken over society. And he, particularly suggested that if religion was going to survive, it was going to have to lean into those kinds of discourses. So religion can speak to things like self-realization, right? Autonomy, personal development. However, it now competes with other discourses, self-help, psychology, pop culture, and all of these things. Now, for Luckman, he didn't think religion would ultimately be able to keep up with the shifting demands of the population. And so he suggested that institutionalized religion would be replaced by sort of personalized religion, right? People would essentially make up their own religion as they needed it. So they would go online and they would buy Reiki crystals and a Buddha statue off Amazon, set that up in their house, and get themselves a meditation corner where they, I don't know what you do with Reiki crystals, or you get your tarot cards, you tell your fortune, and you pray to Buddha and then to Jesus, and off you go to the races, right? But people would cobble together religious identities from the available resources on a very personalized level. But institutions would have a much harder time keeping up. Got 3 minutes left. Okay. So, yeah, without the overarching religious narrative, these broadly socially without this kind of overarching narrative that everybody sort of accepts as the symbolic universe, people start to make up their own, right? So religions become just one discourse among many, and people, can choose from things like, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and psychoanalysis. Or, and we'll see this when we talk a little bit about Gen Z later in the course, they can put it together for themselves, right? So they basically will kind of cobble together a kind of religion for themselves. And this is what Luckman calls invisible religion, right? When you're putting together your own sort of religious identity from the available cultural materials, that is something that's hard to see, right? Why? Because it doesn't have an institutional form, right? So if this is sometimes captured in the phrase that people will use to talk about people who are still sort of interested in religious ideas, but aren't part of a religious institution, right? Spiritual, but not religious, is a sort of form of invisible religion, according to Luckman, right? Because it's like, you're not going to see it in institutional form, but, and Stark will make this point too, if you're, engaging in tarot, while you wear your Kabbalah bracelet and have a statue of the Buddha in your house, you're religious in some sense, but not in a way that would easily be detectable sociologically, because it's essentially invisible. Okay. I have so little left, so we'll probably just finish up next time. Can I do this in 1 minute? I'm going to do this in 1 minute. I'm going to do sheltered enclave theory in 1 minute. Okay. What's that? I can do it faster than that. Sheltered enclave theory is really simple, right? So this is another minor theory of religion, and it's basically religions, especially the traditional ones, can only survive if they are sheltered from the undermining effects of modernity, right? So again, modernity toxic to religion is key to this theory. Okay, so how do you get a successful religion? You have to have low social engagement. Everybody in your religious group keeps to themselves and is somewhat culturally isolated. Really extreme example of this would be the Amish, right? They keep to themselves. They don't engage in modern media or technology. Hutterites would be another example of this. But American fundamentalist Protestants, right, where basically they might be part of society, but culturally they're going to be very isolated. So they have a high distinction, right? They look funny. And they keep to themselves. They have their own kind of way of being and low cultural engagement. And that, in sheltered enclave theory, says this is the only way religion's going to survive. I'm now exactly at 10:50. I'm going to stop. I got 3 very short theories to go through on Monday. We'll finish up and then we'll review for the exam. It'll be great. Woo! All right. Okay. Oh yeah, I can do status discontent.
I have 3 questions.
3 questions. Go. Hang on. I'm going to turn off the mic.
Okay, sounds good. They're also like the exam.
Oh.
Kind of sort of.
All right.
So my first one is, well, the online lectures, are they all just like what's in class?
Yes.
Oh, so exactly like.
Yeah, I'm streaming it right now.